Welcome to another masterclass here to Mind for All Seasons. I'm excited to talk to you today about 3 secrets to attract more customers in any market. And I wanted to share this with our membership because so many professionals in assisted living and skilled nursing are part of our community. But we also have people that are working in other professions. We have plenty of retirees. And the kinds of principles that we're going to talk about in this really apply across professions, but they also have to do with human interaction in general. And so they can help any of us have a better experience in our lives. So I want to tell you just a little bit more about some experiences that I had back in 2009. I had been an assisted living professional for 9 years at that point. And I started my career working as a program director at a large assisted living community in Salt Lake City, Utah. And that job transitioned into becoming the executive director at that community. And I stayed with that company for 9 years. And then I had a call from a recruiter out of the blue one day that caught my attention. Normally, I didn't pay a lot of attention to recruiting calls. They came fairly often. But I paid attention to this one because it was about a job in Boise, Idaho, where I grew up. And most of my family lives in Boise. And I'd been wanting to get back there, and my wife wanted to move there. We happened to have our house already on the market because we had had our 4th child and we needed another bedroom anyway. So I thought, wow, what are the chances? We're already looking to move, and there's a recruiter calling with a job in Boise. And it was at a memory care specific community. And I was excited to make the move and have an opportunity to work more specifically with people who were living with dementia, something that I've been interested in my entire life, basically. So I uprooted my family, moved to Boise, and I got to take over a memory care community that was really struggling at 72% occupancy. And I was there to turn it around. The owner said, do everything that you need to do. We're going to stay out of your way. If you need to spend money, tell us what we need to spend money on, but we want you to turn this around. And at first it was really difficult because the community had a horrible reputation. There was a lot of negative talk around town about this community and some of the things that had gone on there. And so I really had my work cut out for me. And I stumbled onto some things that are the foundation of what I want to share with you today. And as I applied those principles, within a year, that community was full, 100% occupied. And from there on out, we started to build a waiting list. And we stayed full for the next 6 years with a waiting list that sometimes ran to 18 people. And I want to help you understand what principles of human interaction and organizational development led to that kind of success, because they apply directly in each of our lives and in any sort of organization that we're working with. The main job of any business is to attract and keep customers. So what does it actually take to do that? Well, when it comes to an assisted living community, we're basically asking what drives occupancy. Most companies focus on external factors. If people have an occupancy issue, they look outward and they say, well, the market's kind of overbuilt right now and there's a lot of competition. Or I remember talking to an assisted living owner who said, well, we struggle with occupancy because Sunrise Senior Living just built a beautiful, really new building right up the street, and it's tough to compete with that. That's what focusing on external forces looks like and sounds like in practice. But I believe it's actually customer experience that is the true driver of occupancy. People choose to work with this business or that business based on their customer experience and how well they feel things are going for them and whether they can trust the people that they're working with and are they getting the outcomes that they want. So one of the questions that I had to ask myself when I took over that memory care community was, have we earned the right to have more customers? It turns out that was the right question to answer. One of the reasons that I was left asking that question is that I became aware that prior to my arriving there, a family had a really tough experience. And here's how I found out about the experience. About a week into the job, I was getting ready to go out and do some external marketing. I'd been hired not only as the executive director, but the owners of the company said, we want you to handle all the external marketing as well. It's a 37-bed memory care. We feel like you could handle being the administrator and doing external marketing. And that was attractive to me because it meant I got to go meet with all the prospects, and I was the person that had the authority to make sure that we were delivering on what it was that they were being promised. It seemed like a good thing. So, a week into the experience, I was going to go out and do external marketing. And before I left, the business manager said, "Well, Eric, I'm glad you're getting out there, but what are you going to do about the billboard?" And I said, "What? What are you talking about? Billboard?" It turns out that a family of a former resident was very unhappy with some things that occurred with her. And I don't know the whole story. To this day, I never have figured out exactly what happened. But I know that she was on hospice services, not expected to die for more than maybe a few months, but some things rapidly progressed. And as near as I can tell, the community staff made some missteps, the hospice agency made some missteps, and the woman died in conditions that the family was really angry about. So angry that when they realized, hey, we own a large parcel of land on a pretty busy street corner, they decided to put up a billboard with a picture of their mom in bed, in pain, and they put the name of the community on the billboard and said, "This place did this to our mother." And I didn't know about that. When I was recruited, they kind of conveniently left that out of the conversation. So I didn't go out marketing by the end of the first week. That's when I sat back and I went, oh my gosh, do we even deserve to have more residents? I can't ask people to move their loved ones to this community if I don't know for sure that they can even trust us to do a good job. So I started interviewing all of the residents who could speak. I interviewed all their families. I interviewed every staff member. And I simply asked, what's going well that we need to keep doing, and what's not going well? What are the list of things that we need to work on? And I got a pretty decent list of things that needed to be improved. And I categorized those things on the list. I started looking at what things are high impact, but the easiest to implement. Those were the things to do first. Next on the list was high impact, but takes a little bit more time and energy. We also started working on those early because it was going to take longer to complete those. And as we worked through that list of things and really stayed in communication with families and let them know what we were changing and made those changes visible to people, within a few months, we started getting referrals. And that's when I realized that if we were going to stand out in what I call the sea of sameness, we had to really do things differently. And as referrals started coming in, I started asking myself, what's the vision for the community and how do we stand out from other communities? Well, I stumbled on something else that kind of opened up some possibilities in this situation. What I stumbled on was the simple fact that there was some internal politics going on at the Alzheimer's Association local branch that caused them to close that branch down at that time. And so there really wasn't a good resource in the community for families to turn to when their loved ones were living with Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. And I started to get the idea, what if we became that educational resource? What if we weren't just a memory care community? What if this business was actually a place where people could come and they could learn more and they could have greater understanding of their loved ones? What if we define success as anybody who comes through the door is welcomed warmly and they're able to learn more so that when they leave, they know a lot more than when they came and they're empowered with that knowledge. And so I started doing some things differently when people would come in to look. Instead of just showing them around the community and talking about all the features and benefits, I sat down with them, learned more about their loved one, and then I started sharing and teaching. And I found that people had situations that were really modifiable and improvable. For example, I remember one day a lady came in and she was talking about her husband and how much she needed to find placement for him. And I said, well, what's prompted looking now? What shifted? And she said, well, I can't get him in the shower anymore. It's really hard. He fights me. And I said, tell me more about that. And she said, how about I show you? And she rolled up her shirt sleeve and showed me bruises on her arm, where his thrashing had caused her to get bruised. She said he just really struggles. He didn't used to have such a hard time. And I said, well, tell me about the bathroom space. Come to find out, he had become a little less steady on his feet, so she got a shower chair. And it was white, and their shower was white. And she didn't understand the fact that many people with Alzheimer's disease lose peripheral vision, they lose depth perception, and they have a hard time seeing things that are similar in color when they're right next to each other. So here I am thinking, oh my goodness, she's trying to get him to sit on a white shower chair in a white shower, and he probably can't see that all that well. And of course, he's thrashing around and fighting because he's frightened. So I coached her through what might be going on. And I encouraged her to try putting a colored towel on the seat so that he had some visual contrast. It actually made a real difference for her. But in the process of doing that, I stumbled on a way to follow up with this woman. Instead of calling, like most people in charge of marketing in an assisted living community would do, and saying, hey, I'm just following up on the conversation that we had the other day. It looks like you were really interested in a place for your husband, and have you made any decisions yet? Which is awkward anyway, but that's what happens in a lot of places. And instead of doing that, I sort of stumbled onto a reason to call and say, we talked about some things that you could try that might really be helpful for your husband. How's that going? And it had made a real difference. And that bridged the gap. That allowed this community that I was working in to stand out from all the others. It allowed us to create a culture of education. It allowed us to start defining success differently. Success was you come in needing help of some sort because you're serving a loved one with dementia, and you leave with a higher level of knowledge and understanding than you had, and you're empowered. Well, that caused a further pivot. What that led to is realizing, how about we give people what they really want? I learned by listening to people that were coming in, they didn't want to have to move their loved one into a community. They were only moving them when they were forced into the situation. And I realized they would probably move them sooner if they were better educated. But the better way to educate them was to have a program that would help them learn the things that would allow them to be more successful in the home, but also recognize when the risks were getting high, but the crisis hadn't hit yet. So I created a program where we would offer free of charge going into the home and doing a cognitive assessment and a functional needs evaluation and a coaching session. And I would help families learn about their loved one's situation and provide some coaching and guidance so that they would know how to be more successful with them in the same way that I helped that woman be more successful showering her husband. She eventually moved her husband in, and there was no question in her mind where he was going to move as things progressed. He was actually doing really well in the home other than the showers. And when I helped her solve that problem, she became a customer for life. Now, that takes a little bit longer, and we're going to talk more about why more people don't go down that road. But those were some things that I stumbled onto that allowed us to start standing out in the sea of sameness. So here's the first secret to having more customers in any market. We have to recognize that decisions are driven by emotion, not reason. And this is based on biology. This is based on the simple fact that it's the limbic brain. It's the feeling part of our brain that causes people to take action. And then very quickly, the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, kicks in and starts to provide rationale for why we decided to do the thing that we did. Part of how we know this is there are cases of people who have had brain injuries to the limbic brain, and they can tell you all the things that they should be doing and why they should be doing them. They just can't initiate the action itself. They literally can't move forward because they're lacking success in the part of the brain that would allow them to actually take that step. So once we understand that decisions are driven by emotion, not reason, then we start to put the pieces together and realize, oh, if we're going to attract and retain more customers, we have to speak to the emotional brain first. And this is something that Simon Sinek famously taught years ago in what is the second most watched TED Talk in all history. He called it Start with Why. And he later wrote a book called Start with Why. If you haven't read it and you're in business, it's a great book, very insightful. Simon Sinek pointed out in that TED Talk that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And he gave some examples. He pointed out that most computer companies say, we make great computers, and our products are beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Do you want to buy one? And it sounds about like the marketing message from every other computer company out there, and people are left with kind of a meh sort of feeling about it. Simon Sinek pointed out in his TED Talk that Apple speaks very differently. Instead of talking about features and benefits and giving facts, they have a very emotionally driven message. Their marketing basically is communicating the idea that in everything that we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. We do that by making products that are beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We happen to make great computers. Would you like to buy one? Now, that's very different because when you start with why you do things, you attract people who believe what you believe. If you're starting at the center of the circle that you see on this slide, you start with why, and then you talk about how you do that thing, and then ultimately you talk about what you do. It's a very different way of communicating, and it works because it speaks to the emotional part of the brain. So when I began learning that principle and incorporating that kind of thinking into the memory care community that I was running, that's when things really started turning around because I was leveraging an army of marketers called our customers, the residents and their families. That's who really markets the building. And in the process, it started to create a little bit more of what felt almost like a mass movement. Mass movements all have three things in common, regardless of which mass movement you're looking at in history. Mass movements have, number one, a leader that people know, like, and trust. Number two, a clear vision of where the group is going. And number three, there's a new opportunity. So going back to Simon Sinek and his famous TED Talk, he actually gave a great example of this. He talked about Martin Luther King Jr., who gave the famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And thousands of people showed up on a hot summer day because they wanted to hear Martin Luther King Jr. talk about a cause that they believed in. They showed up for themselves. They didn't show up because some politician was going to give a 10-point plan to fix race relations. That's how most people would communicate. But Martin Luther King Jr. didn't say, I have a 10-point plan to fix race relations in the United States of America. He said, I have a dream. And he went on, he elaborated on the dream. He talked about how he really believed in a future where one day his children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And people from all sorts of different races came together because that was the future that they wanted. That's what they believed in. And Martin Luther King Jr. didn't tell people how to get to that end result. He just painted the picture that this is what the future looks like, and it's going to take all of our best efforts. That's what mass movements have. That's why we were able to get to the moon, because when John F. Kennedy stood up and said, we're going to put a man on the moon, and it's going to take the best and the brightest, he wasn't saying exactly how everything was going to happen. He just painted the vision of a brighter tomorrow. Essentially, all great leaders do that one thing. They paint a vision of a brighter future, the new opportunity that people want and that they believe in and that they'll move forward for. And when they can paint it vividly to the point that people can see it in their minds and they can practically taste it and almost touch it, when that happens, then people are so eager to line up and to help with the cause. So how do we communicate in emotionally compelling ways in an assisted living community or in any other business for that matter? I want to take you back to my story in this memory care community that I've been telling you about and give you an example of what I started doing that really worked. If it takes an emotional connection for people to take action, one of the most powerful ways that we can connect is through storytelling. There's research to show that if you hook electrodes up to people's brains and you have them listen to someone sharing facts, different parts of the brain will light up. But if you hook the same electrodes up to the same people and they listen to someone telling a story, every brain syncs up in exactly the same way. The same parts of the brain in everybody involved light up if they're hearing a story, which I think is why marketers for years have said things like facts tell, stories sell. So if we want to connect with people, tell stories. And here's what that looks like in practice. I would have a family come into this memory care community looking for a place for their father. And I'd sit down with him and I'd say, tell me about your dad. And often the conversation might turn towards something like, what are you going to do to keep my dad engaged? He likes to be busy and he likes to do things with his hands. And most assisted living communities in a scenario like that say things like, well, let me show you our activity calendar. We have a wonderful program director. She's been with us for years. You'll really love Barbara, and I'll show you exactly the kinds of things that we do to keep your dad engaged. That is sharing a fact. And it's not a bad one, and it's accurate. It just doesn't connect with the part of the brain that causes people to take action. So instead, the way that I started answering that question was by telling a story, kind of like this. Oh, that's a really good question. Your dad's situation reminds me of another situation that I ran into about a year ago with another resident. He was actually the first man that moved into the community after I started working here. When I came here in 2009, we had all women. And then one day, I had a call from a lady, and she was looking for a place for her husband. And as I got to know him a little bit better, I found that he had early onset Alzheimer's disease. He was a pretty young guy when Alzheimer's hit him. He was in his late 50s, and he was in his early 60s at the time that his wife called. And as I went out and I did an evaluation and got to know him and spent some time with him, I found that he was a really interesting guy. He sold cars for a living. And on the side, he built rocket cars in a huge shop in his backyard. And he would take them to the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah and he would race them at something like 200 miles an hour. So interesting. And I knew that she needed a place for him, but I was actually kind of worried to move him into our community because all of our programming was built around 85-year-old women. And this guy needed something very different. And so I sat down with our leadership team and I said, we have an opening and we could move this guy in. But I'm concerned about what we'll do with him. He's younger. He's physically really capable. And Chandra Turner, our maintenance director, said, Eric, I already know what we'll do with this. I've got it covered. And I had learned a long time ago to trust Chandra. She has a heart of gold and she was extremely committed. And so this resident moved in. And every time Chandra was moving chairs or tables, guess who was helping her? Every time she was shampooing the carpet, guess who was holding the cord so that people wouldn't trip? One day, Chandra was painting in the building, and this resident needed something to do. And so she brilliantly painted a square on the wall. She played the damsel in distress card, and she said, oh, I don't know how I'm going to get everything done. I'm so far behind. Could you help me? And this man said, well, sure. What do I need to do? And she handed him a paint roller and said, can you paint this area on the wall? And he said, sure. And he spent 45 minutes rolling paint into that square. And it kept him occupied. Another day, she had to get on the roof to take care of the air conditioning unit. And she needed a way for him to be engaged, but he couldn't get on the roof. So she got an empty lacquer can, filled it with water, got a clean paintbrush, and again played the damsel in distress card and said, I don't know how I'm going to get all this stuff done. I have to go take care of the air conditioner, but I'm supposed to be painting the handrails with lacquer. Could you help me? And he said, sure. What do I have to do? And she held out a lacquer can with a paintbrush and it had water in it. And she just showed him how he could brush that on the handrails. He spent 2 hours that day brushing clean water on the handrails, and he felt really important and engaged. That's the kind of thing that we would do for your dad. If you moved your father into this community, we would use the same approach for him because that's what works. When you tell a story like that and you show them how you would do things and you allow them to experience it, their decision's already made up. They know that they can trust you because they've connected at an emotional level. So when you're meeting with people, regardless of what kind of business you're in, or regardless of even if you're not in business and you're just trying to have better interactions with people and you want to connect at an emotional level, listen carefully. Listening is by far the most active thing that we do as people. And most of us aren't all that active in doing it. It takes a lot of brain power to pay attention not just to the words, but to the gestures, to the tone, to the pitch, to word selection. Why that word? That kind of stands out. To really pay attention instead of just thinking about how we're going to respond, that takes a lot of brain power. So listen carefully and answer questions that people have with stories when possible, especially if you're in kind of a sales type of situation. Help people feel what it could be like to work with you and share insights to help others see new possibilities. Help them learn why it is that their husband might be struggling in the shower because you've got a white shower chair in a white shower and he might not be able to see that. When people have an aha moment and the light bulb goes on, they're excited and they trust you because you just helped them learn something valuable. Describe the epiphany that opened you up to a new opportunity. If you're talking to someone and you can do what Russell Brunson once called walking people across the epiphany bridge, it allows you to connect with them emotionally. And what that looks like is talking to them about a time that you were experiencing what they're going through, and then you walk them across the bridge to where you had some aha moments. The whole arc of what I'm sharing with you in this presentation is kind of the epiphanies that I had when I was working in this memory care community and had to bring it from 72% occupied to full. And I stumbled onto some of these things, and it was only in retrospect that I looked back and realized why it worked so well. Don't be afraid to talk about challenges that you had and how you overcame them. If you're in an assisted living or skilled nursing business, you might have had some challenging survey outcomes. Don't shy away from that. Confront it openly. Say, yeah, we really blew it. We made a mistake, and here's what was found in our survey. And let me walk you through exactly what we did to correct that problem. Most human beings have no problem with others being flawed and making mistakes because we all know intuitively we're messed up ourselves. We make plenty of mistakes. What we want is to know we can trust someone. And if we can be honest about a mistake and own it, but demonstrate that we've learned from it and we've corrected it, that actually causes people to trust us more. So how can we leverage all these ideas to build a following of what you might call raving fans? Well, think of your business as a movement, not just an institution. You're building a movement. You're changing something for the better. You're moving into the future. It's the dream that you have. What is your dream? Just like Martin Luther King Jr. had his dream. Show versus tell. So bring the outcome of whatever it is that you're trying to serve people by doing to life by telling them stories. In the same way that when I talked about that resident that moved in and Chandra helped him be a lot more engaged, and she was our maintenance director, I demonstrated by sharing that story how we would take care of men. And interestingly, pretty quickly, within about a year and a half, we went from no men in the building to over 50% of our residents were men. Just because we came up with a solution like that, and I would tell the same story. And we kept following through on it. We kept leveraging those kinds of principles. If you want to have raving fans, remember first and foremost that humans connect with humans. Humans don't connect with billboards. They don't connect with facts. They don't connect with all the reasons that we might list why doing something is a good idea. They connect with other humans. And when we take the time to connect in a meaningful way, it makes all the difference. At the end of the day, people want three things to feel like they can move forward and like they can really trust an organization. They want clarity, they want simplicity, and they want a sense of certainty that if they do these things, that they're going to have a really positive outcome. And clarity, simplicity, and certainty are pretty lacking in the world today. So when someone can stand up and in a compelling way with plenty of conviction and evidence to back it up, when they can speak with clarity, simplicity, and certainty, people line up and say, yeah, let's move. Let's get moving in that direction. So one of the things that we can understand is that many of the people that we serve might be feeling some uncertainty. Think about what it's like for a family to move a loved one into an assisted living or skilled nursing community. And I'm specifically talking about assisted living and skilled nursing because that's what a lot of our members here participate in. So if you think about what it's like, if you think about the decision and the gut-wrenching experiences that people have when they're moving someone in, you start to recognize some real uncertainty. If you've been taking care of your spouse for years as they're battling dementia, can you trust someone else to love them as much as you do and to really take care of them the way that you would take care of them? Obviously, no one else can love them the same way that you do. But what about trust? Can you trust that they will do what they need to do and that they will be kind? And that if your spouse is having a tough day and starts swatting at someone because she's annoyed or irritated, how will they handle it? If you can get clear on the kinds of fears and uncertainty that people are having, then we can help people start to change the narrative that goes in their own mind. Because often the narrative says, I don't know if I can do that to her. I'm not sure that I could put him through that. And instead of thinking about, can I do this to her? We need to help people shift and start wondering, is it time to do this for her? Could I do this to help him? And we shift that narrative as we understand their fears and uncertainty, but we also help them see things in a little bit different way. For example, I've talked to many families that have said, well, yeah, I'm looking for a place for my loved one because I can tell where this is going and eventually I'm going to need it. So I thought I'd look early and just get on a waiting list somewhere if there is one. And that's great. But when I've said, well, tell me about your spouse or tell me about your mom, tell me about your dad, I get interesting stories. And oftentimes what I would hear is things like, well, my husband's actually pretty easy to take care of. He gets up kind of late in the morning. I get him some breakfast. He sits on the couch and he watches a little TV. He likes to watch game shows, so he watches game shows till lunch. Then I feed him some lunch. Then he falls asleep for a couple hours. Then he's up and he watches a little bit more TV. And then we have dinner. And then we kind of putter around at night for a little bit. And then he goes to bed. It's not that hard. I can take care of him right now. Well, when I hear that, what I think is, my goodness, people have 5 core needs. People have spiritual, physical, intellectual, cultural, and emotional needs. And there's a lot of needs not being met in the story that I just heard from this person. We're talking about a man that's sitting on the couch the majority of the day. Being sedentary is hastening his decline. Being sedentary causes the brain to deteriorate faster. It causes metabolic health problems to get worse. So from the standpoint of the spouse, maybe it's easy, but that doesn't mean that his needs are being met. Maybe his bowels would function a lot better if he was up moving around and upright a little bit more. Maybe his brain would function better if he was more engaged. And it's important not to bludgeon someone with facts like that so that they feel like, oh, I'm doing a terrible job. But when you start to talk about what are his spiritual needs? What are his physical needs? What are his intellectual needs? What are we doing to stimulate the mind? Then people on their own start recognizing, he actually needs to be more physically active. And their mind starts to shift towards saying, maybe it would be doing something for him to move him into a community where he's got a little bit bigger distances to traverse. And there's a program curriculum where there are things that he can engage in. There's an exercise class every day, for example. When we can help people start seeing what they're missing by not taking advantage of the service that we have, then they start to overcome that uncertainty. Let's go to the second secret to how we can have more customers in any market. Leverage the power of your true marketing team. I mentioned earlier that it's the families of the residents, and it's the residents, and it's their friends, and it's other people who come into a memory care or assisted living or skilled nursing building that are actually the true marketing team. And in any business, you can ask yourself, who really markets this business? We need to understand that 65% of new business comes from referrals. And if you consider a few statistics, I think you'll find this interesting. 92% of us trust things that we hear from friends. 77% of people are more likely to buy when they learn about a service from a friend. 37% pay attention to search engine ads, and less than 24% of people pay attention to banner ads or email or direct mail. So you can certainly drive a business with email, but if 77% of people are more likely to buy when they learn about something from a friend, well, if you're running an assisted living or memory care community, the very best scenario is when almost everybody that walks through the door and says, I'd like to learn more about your community. When you say, how did you hear about us? They say, I've had 3 people tell me this is the only place that they'd ever move their loved one to. When the customer experience is so good that people want to shout it from the rooftops, that's when you don't have an occupancy problem. And that's when in any business, you don't have a customer problem. People keep coming because others do the marketing for you. So why don't we do more referral marketing? Well, fundamentally, it's probably because hunting is a little sexier than farming. Hunting involves the thrill of the kill. And you're going out there and you're tracking an animal and you're trying to find the right spaces to locate that animal in so that you can bring it down and drag it home so that you can feed your family. And I'm not a big hunter myself, but when it comes to prospecting in any sort of business, or even prospecting if you're looking for a significant other, hunting is kind of exciting in a way. But you can never feed a large population by hunting. That's why for humanity to exist on a much larger scale, we had to get good at farming. The only way to feed a huge population is with farming. But farming is slow. Farming is painful. You got to prepare the soil, and then you have to have seeds, and you have to plant those seeds in just the right way, and you have to water them, and you have to do a whole lot of work before a little green shoot starts to come up through the ground. And if you quit working at that point, then nothing good happens. So you have to nurture the plant for a long period of time. And you have to keep weeding and watering and fertilizing. And the conditions have to be right. You need just the right amount of sunshine. And you need plenty of water. And finally, after a lot of effort, the plant will start to produce. But once it does, then you get to enjoy the harvest over and over as the plant just keeps producing. It takes a while for a fruit tree to be able to get to the point that it's highly productive. But once it is, as long as you keep nurturing it and caring for it and pruning it the way that you need to, it will produce for years on end. And that's how you feed a large population. So if you are struggling to have enough customers, one of the biggest problems is that the natural tendency is to go out and hunt. But the thing that solves the problem long term is to farm. It's to take care of your customer. It's to find out what they need, to spend more time listening and asking questions and correcting challenges, and truly creating a system where people love what you're doing so much that they'll shout it from the rooftops. Now, if we ask who's your real customer in the context of a company like Nike, we also learn some interesting things. Nike's real customer is not all the people that buy shoes. Nike's real customer are professional athletes. That's why they've been so successful. Because Nike realized early on, if you get Michael Jordan to wear your shoes, tens of thousands of people are going to go buy Nike Air Jordans, and you're going to grow a really big business. So they spend time taking care of the athletes that endorse their products. That's why at Nike headquarters, they've got all kinds of things geared toward the professional athlete to wow them and to nurture those relationships, because that's what drives the rest of the business. So if you ask yourself, who's the real customer in an assisted living, memory care, skilled nursing, home care kind of situation, often the real customer is the adult daughter that's writing the check every month. What are you doing to take care of that customer? Sometimes your real customer is the hospice agency that sends their nurse in every week to check on their hospice patients, or the bath aide that comes in. Are we doing enough to take care of the real customer? If the bath aide is coming in the building and you treat them like they're in your way, you just squashed your real customer. You said, I'm going to treat you like dirt and you're not going to refer to me. But if instead you approach them and say, hey, you've been here for a couple hours. Can I get you a drink? You've been working really hard. We so appreciate what you do. If you occasionally surprise them with a little thank you note or a gift card someplace because you're grateful for what they do, that goes a long way toward taking care of your real customer. You might interview your real customer and ask, you don't even have to literally sit down with them. But if you think through this, you could say, what's the top problem that they're facing right now? What really frustrates them about working with this industry or profession? If you think about the family members of residents as the real customer, as opposed to the resident themselves in assisted living, well, what frustrates families about working with assisted living professionals? I think you can learn a lot when you ask that question. What's the biggest fear in making the decision? So in terms of assisted living, what's your biggest fear in moving your loved one in? What would you pay a premium for if I could guarantee it? I think those are really helpful questions that can unlock next level kinds of things that we do in any sort of business or relationship. You might ask, what's on the mind of your customer, especially when they're falling asleep or waking up. As humans, we are most vulnerable when we're about to fall asleep and when we're waking up. And the things that we really care about that are really stressful and concerning to us are things that we think about when we're falling asleep and when we're waking up. If we can get clear on what our customers think about at those times, and we can communicate in compelling ways about those things, and we can help meet those needs, that's when we have raving fans. We can also identify the first and most important referral strategy. And this is something that's often overlooked. If you want to get strong referrals from your army of marketers called all of your existing customers, then first and foremost, you have to deliver on baseline expectations. When I took over that memory care community in 2009, we were not delivering on baseline expectations. There were basic things that were going wrong, and families were concerned. And the way to get the referrals to start flowing was to figure out what their concerns were and do something about it. And that's all it took to get people to love what we were doing and start referring. Now, I'll give you a quick summary of a kind of a case study from a consulting opportunity that I had. It was about 9 years ago. An administrator who we'll call RC reached out and said, Eric, I want to hire you for some coaching. I need some help. They had an occupancy problem in their building. He was relatively new coming on the scene. And he was kind of in a situation like I was when I took over that memory care community. And I said, I would love to help you. And as I started to get to know some of the families of residents in that building, I started hearing the same kind of feedback. They said, we like RC. He's a nice guy, but he's not very responsive. It's like he's never in his office. He's always busy. We can't get him easily. And I think he would help us with things, but he's just not all that accessible. And I sat down with him and I said, help me know what's going on here. And he said, well, I'm just trying to help the staff get things figured out. And sometimes they struggle to get residents in the shower, so I have to go and get them in the shower. And that's when we had to have a conversation that his job isn't to do all the work. It's to get his work done through other people and to empower them. So we started focusing on how he could teach the staff how to be more successful, how he could help, but then coach them through what he did that made the difference. So that instead of them just calling and him rushing over and leaving other vital work like checking in with the families of those residents, that he was progressively teaching the staff to be more and more successful. And obviously, there's a lot more than I can quickly summarize in a presentation like this. There were weeks of effort to get him to the point that he could do that. But once he was empowering the staff and he was more accessible to families, then I started coaching him through being proactively accessible. So what he was doing was moving people into the community, and he put a lot of work into getting their interim care plan put together along with their nurse. But once that was done, once they met with the family and they were moving forward, that was it. It was like hands off. And the only time that he talked to families was when something was wrong. And I suggested if the only time that those families hear from you is when there's a problem, then every time the phone rings, their heart's going to skip a beat and they're going to be terrified to talk to you because they will know it's a problem. How about you reach out to them proactively and assist them in knowing the good things that are happening with their loved one, so that about every fifth call, there's maybe an incident to report or something that's not quite right. But most of the time when you call, it's for good reasons. Let's take more time to do that. Well, when he did that, the referrals started flowing. That's what made a difference. So if customer experience is our real driver, how do we measure customer experience? Most people will lie to you, so you have to ask carefully. If you ask general things like, well, how are things going? People are going to say fine. In the same way that if you're at a restaurant and the server or the manager comes up and says, how's your meal tonight? You're going to say, oh, everything's fine. But if that server in the restaurant walks up and says, we're trying to do everything possible to make this the best dining experience, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst experience you've ever had and 10 the best meal you've ever had in your life, how would you rate tonight's meal? Well, that's a very specific question, and you're more likely to get a specific answer like, I'd give it a 6. And if they give you anything less than a 10, then simply ask, what would it take to make it a 10? And don't try to justify anything, just thank them for the feedback. And then you go hustle and you go to work on exactly what your customers are consistently telling you that it would take to make the experience a 10. And if you can do that and solve that over and over and over, then you have a handle on customer experience. So as you ask authentically and you listen and address concerns and report back to them and show what you've done, it makes a huge difference. Asking frequently says, I really want to know, and I really want to make this better. Part of how we can increase referrals is to bring the wow. We have to leverage the fact that humans often only see the unusual. If you drive the same route to work every day, you tune everything out. It's only when there's a brand new billboard or there's road construction or an accident that you start to pay attention and go, oh my goodness, something different is happening. So we have to be remarkable to give others a reason to remark about us. So I love how Walt Disney put it when he said, do what you do so well and so uniquely that people cannot resist telling others about you. And it was TripAdvisor that pointed out when guests experience a delightful surprise, an astonishing 94% expressed an unconditional willingness to recommend the hotel compared with only 60% who were very satisfied. If your customer says, I'm very satisfied, that doesn't mean that they're going to refer. They have to have a delightful surprise to be willing to refer. So here's what a delightful surprise looks like. If you realize the real customer is that adult daughter of the resident who's stroking the check every month, and that it was really hard for her to have the courage to move the loved one into your community, then you start to ask, well, what could I do to delight her? What would be a great surprise? How about once you get her loved one settled in the community, you wait a couple of weeks, maybe even a little bit longer, and you send a handwritten card that says something like, thank you so much for trusting us with your mom. We're so grateful to have her living here, and we're so thankful that you would trust us to meet her needs. You've probably spent a lot of time really not taking any time for yourself because you took care of your mom for 5 years before you moved her in. And you're probably just starting to get your life back into any semblance of a routine. You mentioned a few weeks ago that Texas Roadhouse is your favorite restaurant. Here's a gift card to Texas Roadhouse. We hope you'll enjoy an evening on us. That is the kind of thing that people will post on social media and they'll say, I love this assisted living community. They don't just look after my mom, they're taking care of me. And there are all sorts of different ways that we could wow people with a delightful surprise. And it doesn't have to be expensive. There's a great company called Giftology that actually helps companies get really good at gifting. And they even take some of the stuff off your plate. There's something to look into. Okay, last secret, and then we'll wrap up and go to some quick Q&A here. Create a high performance culture, because that helps generate an environment that people can trust and people that want to refer others to experience that kind of high performance culture. Culture is just the people that you bring into it. A company becomes the people it hires, not the plan it makes, said Vinod Khosla, founder of Sun Microsystems. So culture evolves around the people that you're hiring. So if you want to have a high performance culture, your number one training tool is to lead by example. In the photo that you see on this slide, all three runners are breaking the world record. Usain Bolt was the first place finisher. But when the other two runners were interviewed later, they were asked, did you know when you were running the race that you were on pace to beat the world record? And they said, no, we were just trying to catch Usain. Humans don't go as fast as they can go. They go as fast as the leader goes. And we learn by mimicking. So too many leaders are not spending enough time being out there demonstrating, leading their teams and nurturing them. So that's our number one training tool, lead by example. As Professor Hugh Nibley once put it, true leaders are inspiring because they are inspired. So if the team's not doing enough, look in the mirror. That's a good place to start. Great leaders need to set the vision. You have to design the mission, the goals, identify and find who you need to help achieve those goals, and invest them in the vision. This is Howard Schultz, who built Starbucks from a struggling small Seattle coffee company into the worldwide behemoth. And he did it by building an education company and by building a people company instead of building a coffee company. Did you know that baristas at Starbucks, when Howard Schultz was there, would get at least 72 hours of training in year one? If it takes 72 hours to train a barista how to pour an expensive cup of coffee, so people would come back again and again and again, instead of going to McDonald's where they could get a much less expensive cup of coffee, if that's what it takes to be world class, then where's the bar for what it takes to train frontline staff in assisted living or skilled nursing or home care to be able to go in the room and build trust with someone who doesn't even remember who they are in a matter of minutes, and then get them into the bathroom or into the shower? I don't even know where that bar is, but it must be higher than 72 hours. And I don't know anybody that's getting 72 hours of training in any sort of long-term care setting. We have our work cut out for us. We can do more to train people at a higher level. We can understand what A players want. They need other people around them and a sense of belonging to something special. But those other people also need to be other A players. They're not looking to be around B players and C players. A players want to be around A players. So the minute you let a B or a C on the team, you lose your A players. And it sinks the ship. You don't have a high-performance team. A players want challenge. They want bold ideas. They want the chance to do something amazing. They want opportunity. They want growth. And yeah, they want money, but it's about number 5 on the list. One of the ways that we can help elevate the team and set the example is a technique I've shared with a few of you, but if you haven't heard it, I'll describe it. It's called pennies in the pocket. All of us as humans need about 5 positive experiences for every one that is negative. And that's hard to do. And most frontline staff think they don't get nearly enough recognition and praise from their supervisors. So put 5 pennies in your left pocket in the morning, and your goal is to move all 5 pennies to the right pocket by the end of the day. You get to move a penny every time you give meaningful, deserved, specific praise. Not a pat on the back, nice job. Nothing generic, but very specific praise about something that's going well for them. If you can do that, it will elevate everything in the organization. So I hope that you'll take that idea. It's actually one of the most loved ideas that I've ever shared with groups around the country when I speak live to groups. They love pennies in the pocket. If you can do that, I promise you it'll elevate people around you and create a better culture. I hope that you'll take an opportunity to apply these principles, that you'll think about how you could farm instead of hunt, how you could nurture relationships, build a high performance team, leverage your true marketers. That's what allows us to have a steady flow of customers, regardless of what the rest of the market's doing. So I hope you'll come back next week at the same time, and I will see you then.